Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight, we are going to be diving into the depths of glitches in time. Be cautious though, as you don't want to get lost along the way. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable. Keep your wristwatch ready, and let the darkness take control. I'm 36 now, but the following happened to me when I was 19. A quick bit of backstory. I worked as a volunteer firefighter in a small West Australian town in the southwest. In addition to the normal volunteer firefighter ins and outs of attending incidents, I was also involved in the sports side of the fire brigade. This comprised of the individual and team events, and the fire brigade you belonged to was your team. And across Western Australia, there were about 30 such teams/brigades, and between October to April, we would travel and compete. We had travelled to Geraldton to compete in the state championships in 1999, and I, through hard work, had won the Champion Fireman Award and was at the hosting fire brigade's after-event celebration, and was enjoying myself with my team drinking beer and socializing, which started around 5 p.m. While I admit I was pretty drunk, I was still traveling well, as there were a lot of people, and a lot of my time was spent talking to officials, older members, and with friends catching up, so I had not really got my drink on yet. I needed to go to the toilet, so I just went around the corner and began to urinate in the garden like I had a few times before, and being the same for every other guy at the party. And that was when I got a phone call from an unknown number. Being away from the noise, I answered it, and I remember the guy asking for someone. I didn't know them and ended the call after perhaps 10 to 15 seconds of, "Sorry, wrong number." I finished and then went straight back to the party. When I was returned, I was in absolute shock. Everyone had disappeared. It was dead quiet. Every table and chair was neatly stacked, all the rubbish cleared and the lights off and the doors locked. It was just dead quiet, and not a sound could be heard across the town. I was very confused. I took my phone out, and it was just after 4 a.m. What the hell happened? I checked through it, and my phone showed literally dozens of missed calls and 30 to 40 messages of people searching for me and looking for me. I called my mate and made it back to my hotel, and over the next few days confirmed with many people that I had been standing in a circle and excused myself to take a leak. And after I received the phone call, that was that. No one saw any of me that night. Where I urinated was where everyone was doing it, so it's impossible that I could have been there unnoticed and a group of friends searched for me around while I was gone. I still don't know what happened, and I'm confused as hell. This happened a few months ago. My wife and I went to the pool in our apartment complex for an evening swim, and there was a child with his mum there. Nobody else was there or in the pool. Now this kid seemed like he was a bit off, autistic perhaps, but what was strange is when he was near us in the pool, he gave off strange vibes. So there we were in the deep end, and this kid is on a styrofoam boogie board floating around us in the same area, making weird noises and staring at us. So we decide to head to the shallow end. I swam underwater for a bit and popped up when I could touch the bottom. But what happened next is something I have never experienced. When I came up, I looked around for my wife, and she was nowhere to be found. The kid was still at the deep end floating around, and there was nobody but he and I in the pool. The kid's mum was outside the pool though. The pool lights were on, and I could clearly see the whole pool, but she wasn't there. I swear for a good 10 to 15 seconds I was looking all over the place. And suddenly behind me, she was there again, instantly. She said to me, "I couldn't find you. I thought you got out or something." So for a brief moment in time, we couldn't see each other, and neither of us had gotten out of the pool. But we were both in the shallow end, somehow. While the creepy autistic kid liked to float around in the deep end of the pool, it's not like we were back to back or anything. We would have bumped into each other or heard each other's movements in the water. Not to mention the fact that I spun around a few times looking for her. Honestly, we still can't figure it out. When I was 18, my mother kicked me out the house after she caught me drinking. I moved in with my estranged father, who lived in a 200-year-old house on the coast of western Michigan. In the kitchen was a door to the basement, where he had a studio that he spent most of his time in. He's a painter. And from the living room you could see around the archway and most of the kitchen. Anyway, I was sitting on the couch reading and listening to the radio when the DJ announced the date, July 2nd, the day before my grandmother's birthday. I looked up and saw my father in the kitchen wearing an old red and blue Pistons hat and matching windbreaker and pants, an outfit that I hadn't seen him in ages. I called him and asked him if he had any plans for Grandma's birthday, because we hadn't discussed it yet. He had a stunned look on his face and seemingly backed up and disappeared. His reaction was a bit bizarre, but I wrote it off immediately, as he smokes a lot of green and sometimes acts strange or avoids me when he's a bit too into it. I got off the couch in an attempt to follow him, but when I made it to the kitchen he was gone. The basement door was shut and locked, but I hadn't heard the door close. A few hours pass and he comes back upstairs to make himself some dinner. I was a little ticked that he ignored me, and being young, I rushed into the kitchen for scolding him for being rude earlier. I asked him why he wouldn't answer me when I asked him about Grandma's birthday, and told him that she should be more important to him, and him not responding made me very upset. He looked confused and told me he hadn't come home all day, that he just got back and came in through the outside door to the basement to carry some art supplies, before coming up and making dinner. I was about to call him a liar when I noticed his outfit was completely different. A ratty old white t-shirt, black sweatpants and a black baseball cap. I asked him why he'd changed his clothes. A little freaked out, but he told me he hadn't. I described what he was wearing when I saw him earlier, and he said that he threw the windbreaker and pants out about 10 years ago. It was his favorite outfit back in the day, and showed me what was left of the hat I was describing. It was practically falling apart in a drawer in his bedroom, which of course meant whatever it was I saw earlier was not my father. I must have had hundreds of spooky stories from living in that house, but this one really sticks with me. I live in a condominium, and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase, and enter the other one. One night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs, and my mum told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer. So we took the keys to the 7th floor apartment, and since it was dinner time, there was no one there. I walked in the pitch dark and realized someone was sitting on the sofa. So I flipped the switch to see my dad sitting there. It was kind of weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have one. I went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked him how the hell he got up here so fast, and everyone gave me a strange look and told me that he had been here the entire time. I told them it wasn't possible because I had just seen him downstairs, and no one believed me. I will now never go back down there alone. Just to make everything quite clear, each of our apartment doors are fitted with 3 types of locks. There's a gate which has its own keyhole and lock. We put another lock in it so that you have to unlock this gate twice, and then there's a door and its own lock. So you need 3 keys just to enter our house if no one is inside. I did get a good look, and it was 100% my father. He's kind of fat and has a serious looking face, so it's hard to mistake him. The apartments are not accessible because not only are they not on the same floor, they aren't even located on top of each other. There's an elevator in between them, and they are on different floors. So there's no way for anyone to go up or down without first meeting at the elevator or the staircase. 12 years ago, I lived across the street from a church and a few blocks away from a library. I lived in a townhome right next door to a 72-year-old woman. I believe it's important to note a few things before I detail some of the concerns I have while living on Joshua Street. I now live on the other side of the country. Thankfully, Joshua Street is located somewhere in the high desert of California. I never had audio hallucinations leading up to the point where I moved there, nor did I ever hear anything out of the ordinary after I moved across the state. The 72-year-old woman I lived next to was a very sound mind and able-bodied. She never once showed even a moment of mental fogginess. She had lived around the area for a long time, was retired, and left her house often. Her name was Hannah. The library had no alterations made to the building, or any that were made public or immediately noticeable whilst I was living there, and I went past it every morning on my commute. The church in question was modern, with no church bells, not inside, not outside, no bell tower, no bell speakers, no clock tower, nothing. It was not a loud church. So anyway, on to the story. Joshua Street was a typical looking area for the dry, arid locale. We had no grass in our front yard, more like a cracked, sandy, clay-like turf, with Joshua trees and other desert shrubs and plants scattered around my area. The townhome was less than luxurious, but no matter how loud I played music or shows, or how loud my neighbours were, we could not hear each other, which was a plus. Hannah was a kind woman who I enjoyed talking to in the mornings, and sometimes came over to her home to have a tea and listen to her stories. A month into living at Joshua Street, I decided to move furniture around so that the couch was up against the wall that separated Hannah's townhouse from mine. Originally, my bookshelves were there, and I wanted to watch TV from a different angle of the house. This wasn't an issue during late night, but during the day I noticed some strange sounds while sitting on the couch. I went to my bedroom on the other side of the room that shared the same back wall, and there was no sound. I looked over all the house for a source, and I eventually figured that it might be coming from the other side of the wall. Although Hannah is very quiet, I never received any noise complaints from her, nor did she tell me that she could hear anything when I played my music loudly, as I asked her to be polite, because this woman was old but certainly not deaf. Eventually I figured I should put my ear to the wall behind the couch. Clearly I could hear what sounded like church bells ringing. Needless to say, it creeped me out. Now I'm not religious, I'm agnostic, so I didn't really know that much about churches. I thought it was strange that I could only hear the sound of bells from the wall, and not when I went outside to see if it came from the church. I shrugged it off, and decided to ask Hannah about it next morning. The next day, I asked Hannah if I could come inside for tea, and she was happy to have me over. I took note that her TV was nowhere near the wall that separated our homes, nor any other kind of audio or radio equipment. This is because her kitchen is a part of that wall. I told Hannah about the bells I heard through the wall, and she told me she had no idea where the sound would be coming from. I asked her if she was watching televangelists or wedding shows or had an alarm clock or loud timer, although I didn't really believe that the sound I could have heard could have come from any of those things. This is when phones were not high-tech and didn't really have the capability to make high-definition sounds. She said that she didn't watch anything of the sort, nor did she have an alarm clock. She joked about after living so long, you just wake up around the same time every day. And she said something that bothered me. She said that there used to be an old church on the same lot, and that the land was smaller than the current one. The modern church is very large, you see, and this old one had church bells, but she never heard any church bells since then. She informed me the church was rebuilt in the 90s, and she thought that maybe I was dozing off on the couch and had dreamt of the church across the street. I went along with it and returned home. The third night after hearing the bells, I decided I would go across the street to visit the church. At this point, I was pretty curious about it. 3 nights in a row, and I found it would be at 6 p.m. every day. Mind you, at the time I had no idea about the significance of the time. I would watch TV when I got home at around 6, and I would hear something faint and put my ear up against the wall. Gong. And I would listen up until either it creeped me out or it suddenly stopped. I visited the church at around 5:45 and stayed there until 6:30. I didn't really want to be a part of the service, so as much as I wanted to listen for anything that sounded like the bells at home. Of course, there was no such sounds, and after asking the staff there about the history of the church, they told me the same thing Hannah did, and they also said they never decided to implement speakers or bells into the new building. Over the weekends, I began to notice other sounds through the wall, including the familiar bell sound. The bell would sound around lunchtime too, and eventually, I figured out this bell would sound at 12 p.m. as well. This is from my journal. The bells sound at 12 now. I wonder if there is any significance to this, or maybe I'm just going crazy. 12 and 6. And now I'm hearing creepy music box sounds. Maybe I should just tell someone about it. They'd probably think I'm mad. Back in 07, a lot more people were going to libraries to do mundane things that many people today just do on their phones in bed. I didn't own a personal computer, and the Razr flip phone had terrible internet capabilities that you had to pay extra for. So I went to my local library with my journal and decided to do some research there. I quickly found that the church bells are traditionally rung at 6 a.m., 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. At this point, I wanted nothing to do with the town I lived in. I live in a house with just my mum and my 2 sisters. We get on quite well. The house is fairly new and built in a decent area. So, onto the story. I was just chilling watching some cartoons and both my sisters were out. It was just me and my mum at home. My mum was probably working in the other room, as I could hear her furiously typing away on her laptop while having a conference call via her phone. I was just chilling and thought I'd get up and get a snack, as Mum hadn't even considered making dinner yet and it was already getting late into the afternoon. Come to think of it, my sisters had probably gone out to eat somewhere. Anyway, I was just in the kitchen getting a snack, when my mum opens the front door with shopping in hand and my 2 sisters right behind her. I look over at them, incredibly confused. I swear my mum was just in the other room. How the hell was she coming back with car keys in hand and groceries in another, and my sisters in tow? I give them a confused look, and they walk straight past me and set the things down on the counter. And then, the creepiest thing of all. They were there, and then in a split second, like in a blink, it's all gone. The door is closed, The stuff they placed on the counter is gone, and there's no one here but me. I shout my mum's name and hear her reply, "I'm on the phone." That was really weird, I thought. I run up to the door and it's still locked. I go over to where my mum is, and she's still on the phone and giving me a confused and slightly annoyed tone. One that says, "What do you want? Can't you see I'm busy?" I collect myself, sit down on the sofa, and try to pretend that that never happened. I'd never told anyone before because I thought for a few moments I was going insane. I never did have that snack. I was on my way to the choir performance I had in a town on the other side of the country. I had to catch the sound check session because if you're not there, you don't perform later. Rules of the choir. I'm running a little late, so I'm driving just a bit over the speed limit, around 80. But the road is almost completely empty, so I figured it was okay, even though it was raining quite heavily. When I was merging onto the highway, I overtook a car that kind of stuck out from the rest. It was a dark green Rover with a Bosnian license plate, which is very rare in my country, and a little sticker in the back that looked like a logo of a fight club or school. It's a very specific combination. I'm driving on the right lane when a dark green Rover passes me. It caught my attention because I was driving pretty fast, and I wanted to see who was in such a hurry to overtake me, as I was overtaking every other driver I encountered on my way so far. Okay, so the guy just caught up to me and passed me. I don't know why, but I remembered the last 3 numbers of his plate, and I still do. A couple of kilometers down the road, I see a pair of lights approaching in my rear mirror, so I move to the right again. When it passes, it was the same car, same plates, same sticker, same brand, and same color. And then it happened 2 more times. The last time was a bit freaky. I saw someone beginning to pass me and I thought, "Hello, Rover," and there he was. 2 of the times it happened on a stretch that had no stops or exits, so I don't know how it occurred, and never once did I overtake him except at the beginning. But here comes the good part. I'm driving back from the concert. It's pretty late and the rain is pouring like hell, so visibility was bad. I was slowly driving home, and this same car passes me twice. I tried to snap a picture, as I was now expecting it the second time, but the first time freaked me the hell out. But due to the rain and bad phone, it didn't add up very well. All in all, the same car passed me 6 times. I was hiking in the woods with my friends in Eastern Europe. I want to keep this place anonymous. It was 4 of us. We were going on a week-long camping trip and really wanted to make the most of it, hike around the area, and just have a great time, the 4 boys. We went out there and on the first day picked a pretty nice spot to set up camp. We brought our fishing supplies and we're going to do some fishing one of these evenings. We were all very excited. There were booze and all the necessary junk food to ensure a great time. Now, where we were camping wasn't too far from the car park, and we could very easily drive into town when we needed more stuff. We intended to explore, but not go very far. Anyway, onto the story. The first few days were great. We were buzzed, having a great time, sharing stories, and generally just hanging out with friends and being in good company. It was on the 3rd day that we decided to pack up our stuff and go further in. There was a nice watering hole where we could fish in the evening and see if we could get any good catches, so we thought we'd try our luck. We set up camp nearby and started fishing. At one point, we really wanted more junk food, and even though we'd moved campsite, it honestly wasn't that long of a walk back to the car park. I volunteered to go to the local supermarket, which should still be open, to pick up all the beers and junk food my friends wanted. I think it was about a 20-minute walk through the woods and then a 10-minute drive, so I would be gone at most an hour and 10, an hour and 20. It's not like the fish were biting very much anyway, so off I went. I got to my car and drove off into the town. Nothing eventful happened. I got to the shop, bought all the stuff, and started making my way back. One tidbit that I do remember is that the security guard was at the store, and he was frantically looking at his watch. It became very clear, to me anyway, that the shop was almost closing, so I was quite fortunate I arrived when I did, 11:50. I left the store, and it closed pretty much straight away, and I parked up in the same spot I was in before not too long ago. I grabbed my bags and began walking in the dark to where my friends were. Now to me, with all this extra weight, I think the journey must have taken about 25 minutes, as I did have to stop and break every once in a while. But when I arrived to the fishing place where they weren't there. I went round to the campsite and only one of my friends, Johnny, was there. I asked very nonchalantly where the other two were, as I put down the bags on the dirt and started rummaging through to open a bag of Doritos. He gave me a fierce look and asked me angrily what the hell I was doing, why I didn't answer my phone, and where the hell was I. I pulled out my phone and showed him. There were no missed calls. But at that moment, I noticed something incredibly odd. The time on my phone now read 4:40 a.m. What? I looked at my phone and over to him and said out loud, "What the hell?" I explained to him that I was there just before the shop closed, drove back and walked the 25 minutes with the shopping to get back here. He yelled at me, calling me a liar, and we were having an argument about this. I told him I didn't know what to say, that is honestly what happened, but that somewhere in between the drive, arriving, and walking to the site, did I lose so much time? I genuinely am clueless as to what happened. My friends had even gone so far as to walk through the woods, call the police, and start a proper hunt to see if I would show up. But there I was. My friends were informed, as were the police, that I had been found, and they came back pretty pissed as well. I did try explaining to them, and said that if we would go to the shop in the morning, that the security guard and footage would be able to prove what I did. Not to mention that the beers were still very cold when I put them down, further proof that they had been where I said they were. They opened the beers tentatively and realized that they were still quite cool, certainly not warming up for being in the warm climate and heating up for 4 hours. Everyone felt very uncomfortable. In the morning, we packed up our stuff and all went home, and never spoke of it again. I still don't know what happened that night. Part of me really does wish to know the truth, but another part of me thinks that maybe this should just be forgotten. Maybe there's something sinister or strange at work, and I just got off lucky. In any case, I try not to think about it too much, because it always gives me the heebie-jeebies. We had a dog that was a bit too unruly to be kept inside, so he spent most of the summer on a lead, beside a large group of forsythia up the hill that was our backyard. My brother and I were responsible for his food and water each day, and being brothers, it often became a race. It wasn't exactly fair for the one of us doing the water that day, but it was what it was, and occasionally ended with a full-out sprint down to the steps by the house, with flying elbows and shoving that somehow never ended in disaster. One day it was my turn to do the water. I filled the jug and went up the steps, trudging up the walk to the dog's run. After emptying out the water, I began pouring into the fresh stuff and looked down the yard. My brother was about halfway up there with the food. I laughed and taunted him that there was no way he'd win the race today since I was almost done. He just shrugged and kept coming up, and went around to the far side of the forsythia. Well, that was odd, but whatever. I'd wait for him to come around and dump food and then start running. I liked the actual races. I finished with the water and scratched the dog's ears for a bit. I went in a bit deeper, scratching and petting the happy pooch, but he never came around. He wasn't in the bushes, he never went back down to the house, and I eventually gave up on the joyful thought of sprinting down laughing at him while he poured the food in and sullenly marched down to the yard and inside. He was standing there in the kitchen talking to my mum. "How'd he get back down here?" "What? Didn't you get the dog's food?" "No, he's been here talking with me. Why?" No reason. I'm pretty sure I saw the ghostly doppelganger of my brother, though nothing bad happened outside getting freaked out by it. It was last year, close to May, when I was feeling very, very anxious about an essay I had to give in a week from then. And as usual, as a way to prevent me from having an anxiety attack, I started reading a book on Wattpad. It was a mystery, suspense and romance book, which I remember was so unusual from being what I normally read, and it captivated me. I read anywhere. I could read on the bus, while waiting for the bus, during class, taking a break. I even sometimes read while walking. And this book was so amazing that I couldn't put it down. Then it happened. On May 22nd, my class was scheduled to go to the annual National Book Exhibition, and I remembered that we had scheduled to meet for coffee with the entire class to show off which books we had brought and discuss the seminar which we had to watch about script writing and book writing and the difference between them. But I didn't go to the seminar. I sneaked away to a photography gala a few roads ahead and returned just in time for the coffee. There I was, so uninterested in the conversation that I continued reading my book. In 48 hours, I had already plowed through 103 chapters and only had 5 more. I was sure I would finish by the time I was home, and I was right. I did finish and even reviewed it, and I had a lengthy conversation with the author too. A week later, I got a notification on my phone that the author updated the 7th chapter of the book, where they had finished. I thought it was a Wattpad glitch, but as I checked it from both my phone and the computer, there were only 7 chapters and not 108. I then went immediately to my chat, and our conversation was gone. I asked her if she had deleted the chapters, and she said no, and then I proceeded to tell her what I had read. She freaked out and asked me how I knew things, and I told her that I'd read it all. She didn't believe me. Figures. I still see notifications about new chapters of the story, and I'm a little bit creeped out. Was it a glitch? Did I see the future? Did my subconscious go that far? Nothing makes sense. A few years ago, I was just coming home from work, absolutely shattered from another grueling day at the office. My boss Janice had given me a motherload, and I was suffering for it, with deadlines approaching. Now I'm not sure what this experience was. Was it a product of my exhaustion, or something more? As I'm walking up to my building, I grab my keys as I usually do, swipe the fob, and open the door. The post boxes are on the left-hand side, and as I go to my post box, I insert the key and flip. Inside there are a few parcels. I get them, look through my mail, put them under my arm, and open the next door to make my way into the concourse of the elevators. It was there that I push the button, and I look to see where the elevator is currently at. Floor 12. Great. It'll be a minute before it comes down. So I start to absent-mindedly look at my envelopes, opening my letters and seeing what I had received. After I was reading this boring document sent from work, did I hear the familiar ding of the elevator. It arrives, and I look to see who's coming out of it. The thing is, it was me. I was wearing a completely different set of clothes. I looked like I was going to the gym. The other me didn't even notice me. He just walked right past me, opened the door and left. I was so taken aback that the elevator doors closed on me and they went up to an even higher floor, and it took a while before it came back down. When it opened again, there was no one there. I was feeling incredibly confused. Was my mind playing tricks on me because I was so tired? Or was it something else? I got in the elevator, rode it all the way up, opened my apartment door, and everything was as it was. I still don't know what to make out of that day, but it's never happened before or since, and I'm glad to live without that fear. 15 years ago, my family and I went to a pre-Hispanic ruin at night to watch an announced planet's alignment. We went there because it's a rural place and a 1-hour trip from a major city, and there are no lights to bother you so you can star watch. Once there at about 10 p.m, we tried looking for the planetary alignment, but no one knew how to identify any planet, so we just watched a pretty starred night, with 2 of my cousins deciding to follow up a hill trail to see what was behind it in search of the unknown, or perhaps something paranormal. We walked for about 20 minutes and found a house with dogs. They began barking at us, and we decided to return. That's all my cousin and I remember for the trek. Meanwhile, the rest of my family had a really strange experience. When they lost sight of us from the distance, they saw a light that moves towards them really slowly without sound, but with strong winds at ground level to move with it. When the lights reached above them, my mother and my aunt screamed, and everybody sheltered in their cars. They wanted to leave, but my cousins and I were still missing. Then, the light kept moving and was lost over the hill that they were trekking. My dad, my brother and my other cousin went up the hill searching for us but couldn't find us. They waited a long time and then again went up the hill for us. They said they also reached the house with the dogs but couldn't find us. They came back, waited, and were very worried. Then we came down as if nothing happened. I remember my family were really worried and asked us why we took so long, and then we just got into the cars and left as quickly as we could. I didn't know anything about why they were worried and didn't ask. Some years later, my mother and my aunt told me this story, asking me why we took so long and if we saw the light. Just then I realized that the trekking for my cousin and I was about 20 minutes at best, but for my family, it was 2 hours or more. Last year, my girlfriend and I went up a bike trip through the trail, and I was expecting to see the house, but I couldn't find it. I'm planning a new trip there to see if I can reach the lake. It certainly weirded all of us out. 10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with 2 friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were around 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we come around a bend. It was a full moon and we could see the reflection from the lake below us, and other than the road, it was completely empty. Suddenly everything went completely dark in the car. No lights, no dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police a quarter of a mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar. After about a minute, the driver of the car turns the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger, in the back seat, sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." Then we realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it had just a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an old time. We turned off the dash lights, headlights and gauges, restarted the CD player, but when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were an hour late. I'm missing an hour of my life, and to this day, I have no idea what happened. I used to walk some trails in a small park in my city. I was a 15 or 16-year-old girl who loved the peace and quiet of the woods as opposed to the heckling of the street. One day I go into my usual time after school at around 3 p.m. or so. I wander my usual route, and I should add it's not possible to get lost because these woods aren't very large. I notice it's getting dark quite quickly, almost out of nowhere, and suddenly I get a call from my mum who is flipping out and demanding to know where I am. She says that she's been calling me for an hour. I tell her I never received any calls and I've been walking like I always do. She tells me that I've been gone for 3 hours, but I'm never gone for more than 1. I check my phone and sure enough it says 6. Somehow I lost 2 hours of my life in those woods, and I have no idea how or why. It felt like an hour to me. My mum's call was also never showed on my log, even though I should never lose service in there. So, some time ago, I came home in our old family house, and when you walk into the front door, there was an armchair facing the TV, and to the left was a sofa, and my older brother was sat on the armchair, and I went to sit on the sofa. Brother's eye view was in my direction, and my mother was in the kitchen cooking. Next minute I heard my sister's voice screaming my name from upstairs. "Yang, come here." I replied, "I'd just be up there in a minute." She screamed at me to come up now, and I replied to give me a minute. She kept on shouting, and so I walked upstairs, and there was no one there. I was extremely confused and walked downstairs and asked my brother where Kim was. He said he didn't know. I walked into the kitchen and asked my mum, and she said that she had gone into town. The strangest bit is that I asked my brother if he had heard me shouting at her, and he said no. I'm still baffled by what went on then. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's installment of Scary Stories. If you did, don't forget to show the video some love. It really does mean a lot. If you would like to have your name featured on the end screen like these awesome people, you can join me on Patreon, where you get some really awesome rewards, and of course it really helps me out too, and it's incredibly appreciated. But no pressure, and thanks for even thinking about it. If there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to email it to me or post it to my Reddit to potentially have it in a future installment. Please be generous with your paragraphing, punctuation, and grammar though, as those are all very important. But for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.